So we're going to start tonight. So tonight is all about the word grief and looking at the book of Jonah. And
You're just thinking Jonah because you're hearing his song.
Sorry, I've been doing that all day.
You did that at home.
Job, it's Job and grief. Thank you. And tonight we're going to be like last week. We did a lot more on the book of Proverbs. But tonight we're going to focus a lot more on this term grief and what that means. Because truth be told, Job is a very big book. It's 42 chapters. And it is so theologically dense and rich that it would be impossible for me to cover it in one class. As a matter of fact, I took a whole class in seminary on it. And I've done a 6-week sermon series on it. And I still don't think it's enough. And the one class doesn't feel like enough. So tonight is going to be a lot more about grief than Job, but we're going to use Job to look at how we experience grief. So before we get started, I've passed out a poem, and I will read it for the benefit of those who are joining us online. And when we read this poem, I want you to look through it and find the one line, one word, one line, 2 lines maybe, that really sticks out to you, that resonates with you. And so let's read that, and I'll give you a second to reflect on it. I built my house by the sea, not on the sands, mind you, not on the shifting sand. And I built it of rock. A strong house by a strong sea, and we got well acquainted, the sea and I. Good neighbors, not that we spoke much. We met in silences, respectful, keeping our distance, but looking our thoughts across the fence of sand. Always the fence of sand our barrier, always the sand between. And then one day, and I still don't know how it happened, the sea came without warning, without welcome even, not sudden and swift, but a shifting across the sand like wine, less like a flow of water than a flow of blood, slow but flowing like an open wound. And I thought of flight, and I thought of drowning, and I thought of death. And while I thought the sea crept higher till it reached my door, and I knew then there was neither flight nor death nor drowning, that when the sea comes calling, you stop being neighbors, well acquainted, friendly at a distance, neighbors. And you give your house for a coral castle, and you learn to breathe underwater. Take a second. What word, what phrase sticks out to you? What do y'all think? What sticks out?
Just a comprehension type question. Are you reading from the poem that the speaker does get sucked into the sea at the end of the poem? Is that kind of what happens?
As in all good poetry classes, I ask the class, is that what happens?
I mean, the last line, then you learn to breathe underwater, like you're overtaken. So like the narrator or writer is overtaken by the sea.
Yeah. And I think the breathe underwater means it has to be symbolic for something, because everything else in the poem can be real except for the breathe underwater.
I think the whole poem is supposed to be symbolic, right?
Yeah. Like two parts stand out to me. Like it's that middle part, like the transitional part, right? And then the sea came without warning. Like it was just sudden, like unexpected. And then the last part where it's like the sea comes calling you, stop being neighbors. We're no longer friendly. Like this is not a like just acquaintance. It's now like overtaken your life or whatever, this is for.
Others?
So for me, in the very beginning, in the first stanza, that's what you call it, fence which suggests it's not a real barrier. I mean, sand isn't, you can kick sand over. So if there's like the barrier there about my house is on rock, water, like somehow we have this barrier of sand, but really it's sand. It's like not the real barrier, I think. And then the without warning to me is something happens, all of a sudden these worlds have to come together. And I don't know that it's so much whether the water overwhelms or if it's just they understand that actually this was a false barrier always. Maybe I just need to open my mind and look at the world in a different way. And I can't control all the things I thought I could control, but if I let go of those, then the world exists in a whole different equilibrium than I thought ever could be. And it's, to me, the neighbor thing is the well-acquainted, friendly at a distance neighbors. Like, that's, we're no longer, oh, hey. It's like, oh, no, we're in one world, living in an integrated, aligned
Yeah.
way.
See, I picked the same line, but I thought it was like, more like how you kept your distance. Like, you didn't really wanna,
Get too involved.
yeah, you didn't really, you know, it's kind of like that fence in the backyard. You don't necessarily have to interact with your neighbors.
Yeah. I always think about at our house, all of our neighbors, except for one, but all the rest of our neighbors, and even the major road we're by, you know, during the summer, we have all these vines and bushes and all this overgrowth that ends up going around the perimeter of our backyard. And it's really nice in the summer and in the fall when everything is blocking and you're very secluded. But then winter comes and all those leaves fall or die, and it's like, oh, everyone's just right there. Like what is this barrier? Does it no longer exist? And what does that feel like? That's the first thing I thought of when I read that line.
I mean, I think the defensive stand-up barrier is to remind you that the builder of the house is not at fault for building the house so close to the sea that he's bound to get sucked in. There's, you know, the water, you have the sand, and then I built my house not on the sand. So you were safe in the way you built your house. You didn't build it on the beach, you built it far away. So then when the water does come up, the builder is not exactly at fault for building a flimsy house or for building a house right next to the sea, but you still get sucked in anyway. And at least in the case of this poem, I'm kind of thinking about Joe. It's not exactly the builder's fault, even though the builder's still destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also thought of this with, there was the viral internet video that went around when the we put it all in the child care room. When the North Carolina floods happened last year or the year before, and there was the one house, and they were like, oh, look, the river's on the other side of the road down there. That's the highest I've ever seen it, but we'll be all right. And then like hard cuts to like a day later, and the river's like right out their front door. They cannot get out. Like, you build your house in such a way, you're like, I'm safe. But sometimes in unexplained, uncertain circumstance, the water finds you anyway, even when you think you're okay. Yeah. Anything else?
So to me, the title is very interesting.
Okay.
Underwater, like she adjusted, right? Like we usually think of being underwater as a bad thing, but she's learned how to exist there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we can kind of read from the poem, and you kind of maybe feel. When I first heard this, it was actually Corey brought this to our staff meeting just today. I was like, oh my goodness, like this perfectly. But when I first read this, I had that feeling of like, oh, I've felt underwater before. Like, I think we all understand that. And going back to our graph over here of the different cycles of life and wisdom and things that can happen to us when we move from that disorder to disorder, and we're trying to find our way back again. I use this example. When you're going through something, it's because your orientation in life, you're looking for something to hold on to and you don't know what it is. And that really resonates with me on this poem. And so that's what we said last week. This is what this class is about. How do you move from disorder into reorder? How do you deal with the disorder? When life's not fair and your orienting points are gone, where do you find it? And so there's always something in our lives that does not go the way we expect. Something in our lives happens that feels unfair. And when we talked about Proverbs last week, we talked a lot about how Proverbs isn't as cut and dry as it may seem, that there's Proverbs that have different meanings, or they'll say one thing, like they'll say, don't answer a fool for his folly, and the next verse says, answer a fool for his folly. But most of the time, the book of Proverbs is very cut and dry. The righteous do well, the unrighteous don't. That's pretty much the answer. So if you were in disorder, to get to reorder, just be righteous, and everything will be fine. You will get yourself out of disorder, and you will be good to go, as long as you're righteous. What about when that doesn't work? I think every single person in this room, every single person watching online can resonate with the idea sometimes things don't go our way, even when we've done nothing wrong. And that's where our friend Job tonight is going to come in. So, as I said, we're going to talk a lot more about grief than Job today, but there's one thing I want to make sure to do, because whenever I talk about Job, I'll be honest with you, Job is one of my top 5 favorite books of the Bible. I could literally talk about Job forever. When I told Teresa, I was like, how am I going to talk about Job? And she was like, don't you think you could just talk about Job for an hour without having prepped anything? And I was like, yes, but still, I probably should. I love this book. It has so much meaning. Some of my favorite songs are based on the book of Job. And like I said, I've done plenty of work around it. But I want to address, quite frankly, the most boring question you can ask about an Old Testament story. And I want to get it out of the way. And if you've been in a Sunday school class with me, you probably know what I'm about to say. Did this story happen? The most boring question we could ask about an Old Testament story. And the answer, I meant to put no there. The answer is probably not. But Job is presented to us like a story. It has a beginning, a middle, a climax, and an end. But there's a lot of things in the story that make it kind of clear. So for example, in the book of Jonah, truly in the book of Jonah, I'm getting mixed up, but in the book of Jonah, it starts out basically with the Aramaic equivalent of once upon a time. And when you hear a story that says once upon a time, you can know, that's probably not something that actually happened. Or in a galaxy far, far away, things like that. And so there's these embedded clues in the book of Jonah, or the book of Job, that would indicate that this story is something other than a historical retelling of something. There is no clear dating on the book of Job. I know we asked about Proverbs last time of when it was written, kind of around 700, probably made a couple different places. But for this, there is no clear date when it was written. It could have been, I found answers from anywhere from the first book of the Old Testament written to the last book of the Old Testament written. It's been anywhere from 10th century BCE to 2nd century BCE. And that's going to be a common theme when we talk about the book of Job. Job is not an Israelite name. That is not a name that typically appears in Israelite culture. And while Job appears other places in the Bible, it's really Job, that terminology, that character, Job, someone of outstanding character, appears in other works in ancient Near Eastern literature. The land of Uz, where Job is from, no one really knows for sure where that is. It's just typically Uz is often translated or understood. The etymology of it is somewhere far away. So again, another clue.
It does look kind of like Oz.
Yeah, maybe, there you go. And so here's our clue. Job, chapter 1, verse 1, first thing written. There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. one of the etymologies for the name Job is the one, the one who wonders where God is. And that's what the story is about. Again, there's so many different clues that to the readers to indicate, hold on, this is not like historical fact. That's not what you should be focusing on. Instead, what we could call this, I'll get back to that in a second. This would often be considered a folk tale. That's what they're looking at. There's also some signs that this book was written not all at once. It was written in different stages because there's both poetry and prose. There's sections of the book that all kind of sound similar, and then there's sections of the book that sound way different. There's even a section in the book, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit, where it's like, this doesn't make any sense to be in the book at all. This doesn't follow any of the themes, the language structure, nothing. This book was clearly added in. And the best way I've seen it described is, and people would disagree about this, because I got really frustrated when I was brushing up for this class, because I was like, okay, someone says that chapter 1 was the first thing written. And then someone said, well, chapter 1 was probably added later. And another person says, well, it was probably added somewhere in the middle. Like, there is no consensus on this book. It's a strange work in the Bible that we have found together. And it's hard to, the normal questions of, when did this happen? When was this written? Who wrote it? Why? Like, those questions are hard to pin down, particularly with this book. And again, my caveat for a lot of this is how I feel about Old Testament stuff. When you ask the story, did this story happen for the New Testament? That's a different question. That's a different answer. But for the Old Testament, did this story happen? My answer is typically, who really cares? And the reason why I say that is, it still matters because this story was so important to God's people that it was preserved over generations and generations and generations. This story, to people who were around, who were there at the Old Testament times, who were trying to survive an exile, being moved around, oppression, they saw something in this story that told them something so profound about who God is that they said, we have to write this down. Our kids need to know about it. Our grandkids need to know about it. Generations that come after us need to know about this story. And so to me, that's why this story matters. It's because it says something about who God is. And I kind of previewed this, but I want one final caveat until we get to the meat of everything. If I were to stand here and I were to give you a 3-hour lecture on Job and what Job means and what it looks like and its themes and what each thing means, somewhere around hour 2.5 hour, Mike could come in here and say, hold on. No. Don't listen to a single word he said. That's all wrong. And then Mike could do a 2-hour and 30-minute lecture on Job. And then Carla could come in here and say, no, all that is wrong. Here's what Job means. And then Dr. Carol Newsom, who is my old professor who wrote the book on what Job means in modern times, could come in and say, they're all wrong. And we could all have an argument for probably a good 8 hours about what Job means. Because this book is so filled with poetry and meaning. Like we just did it with this poem. We talked about the different meanings and what could this mean and what does this mean and maybe this line means more to us. Like poetry is one of those genres of works where it's just so hard to nail down what it means. Like I was so excited. I've been listening to a gentleman named Pete Enns. I put him in last week's session, and I was like, I want to see what he says about Job. And I listened to his podcast for 40 minutes, and I was like, oh, I don't agree with him at all. Like, this is totally different. I've never heard anyone present Job this way. Like that, I scrubbed it out and kind of put it out of my mind. Like, there is so rich and full of meaning. So when I put a caveat on it, I want to say this is what Job and how I approach this book. I will say my Old Testament professor also approaches this book this way, so I don't know if it's necessarily all me or if I'm borrowing just from him, but I do want to caveat that if you go and look up Job and meanings, and like you might say like, wow, Bryce didn't say anything about this. It's because you can read different meanings into it. Okay, so the book of Job. We're going to watch this video because me going through the entire book of Job and describing exactly what happens, this really kind of talks about the story and what is the story that we're dealing with here.
Ends with a strange story that takes place up in the heavens, which are described something like a heavenly command center. So God is there with these angelic creatures called the sons of God, and they're all there reporting for duty.
And God points out this guy Job, his servant, showing how righteous and good he is.
And then one of these angelic creatures approaches. He's referred to in Hebrew as the Satan.
The Satan. Who is this?
Well, this word is actually a title, which literally means the one who is opposed. So out of this whole crew, he is the one questioning how God is running the world. And he proposes that Job might not actually love God, that he's only a good person because God rewards him. If God were to take away all of the good things he gave to Job, then we would see his true colors.
So he thinks Job is just working the system?
That's exactly right. Maybe he's obeying just to get what he wants.
So God agrees to this experiment and allows the Satan to inflict suffering on Job.
And Job loses everyone and everything that he cares about. It is devastating. And remember, he deserves none of this. God himself said so.
The remarkable thing is that in the midst of all this suffering, Job still praises God.
At least for chapters 1 and 2. But then in chapter 3, we find out how he's really feeling inside. He unleashes this poem that reveals this devastation. It's a long, elaborate curse on the day that he was born.
After this, some of Job's friends come to visit him to offer their help. And all of them are like, Job, you must have done something horribly wrong to deserve this. After all, we know God is just, and we know the world is ordered by God's justice and fairness, so you must be getting what you deserve.
And for the next 34 chapters, the friends and Job go back and forth in very dense Hebrew poetry. His friends keep speculating about why God might have sent such suffering, and they even start making up lists of hypothetical sins that Job must have committed. But after each accusation, Job defends his innocence.
And Job is innocent.
He is. He's also on an emotional roller coaster. At some moments, he's very confident that God is still wise and just.
Yeah, in other moments, he's doubting God's goodness.
He even comes to accuse God of being reckless, unfair, and corrupt. So by the end of the dialogues, Job demands that God come and explain himself in person, and God does so. He comes in the form of a great storm cloud.
Now, God doesn't give Job a direct answer. He doesn't tell Job about the conversation with the Satan.
Yeah, he does something very different. He takes Job on a virtual tour of the universe. He shows Job how grand the world is, and he asks him if he's even capable of running it or understanding it, just for a day. He shows Job how much detail there is in the world, things that we might see every day, but really don't understand at all. But God does. He knows it all intimately. He pays attention to the beauty and operations of the universe in ways that we haven't even imagined and in places that we will never see.
Then to conclude, God shows Job two wondrous beasts and brags about how great they are.
Yeah, they are dangerous. I mean, they would kill you without even thinking about it. And God says they're not evil. They're actually a part of his good world.
And then that's it. That's God's whole defense. It's kind of weird. I mean, what was this all about?
And I intentionally ended the video before we got that answer, because that's no fun. So, thoughts from what you see there? Questions before we dive in a little bit deeper? Or are we just ready to dive in a little deeper?
Well, it's interesting to me that the friends tried to find that he had done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just so typical and so irritating that people try to find something wrong with other people.
Yeah.
So that popped out at me.
Well, and it's interesting, you know, we'll talk a little bit about Job's friends just briefly, but a lot of what Job's friends say you can trace back to Proverbs and say this conventional wisdom is what they're relying on. Like, God would not do something bad to you. You had to have done something. Or even worse, maybe your children have done something bad and that's why you're suffering or why they're dead. And it's like, could you imagine But in a way, some folks.
One redeeming quality of friends is before they say anything, they sit on the floor with them for a day and say nothing.
That's true.
I mean, you take that for what it's worth. I think that's maybe a life lesson. Sometimes just being with the person and saying nothing is the best thing to do. And then also, I think it shows that they are well-meaning, even though their approach to helping him is wrong, and even though their doctrine is wrong. They're well-meaning. They're trying to help him see the light.
Right. Yeah, and what I'd push back a little bit on is the book of Job doesn't mean. Never mind. I can't push back because I was about to say the book of Job doesn't say the doctrine was wrong, and that's actually not true. And in the end, it does say they're wrong. So never mind. So yeah.
God says so.
Yeah, God says they're wrong. You're right. Never mind.
Don't you think sometimes though when people are like assigning blame, that they're trying to say like, well, that couldn't happen to me because I didn't do X, Y, or Z. So it's not necessarily like I'm trying to say that you're a bad person. I'm just saying I'm not that person, so this couldn't happen to me.
It's like,
Right.
yeah, well, what did you do to cause this so that I will make sure not to do it?
Yeah.
That's right.
I think it's more of a defense than ill intended, but I mean,
Well,
still
because if
not a nice.
things like that can happen for not doing bad things, then yeah, you're vulnerable. Like if you accept that you can do everything right and things still go bad, then you're not in control anymore. And that's scary.
It's very scary.
I don't know anything about that. Seems really
It's a foreign concept.
It's like really foreign concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't listen to reasons.
Yeah,
We'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it.
Compare notes.
Yeah.
I left the toothpaste off the. I left
Should
the
I
cap off the
put the cap
toothpaste.
Put that toilet seat down.
Yeah. All right. So again, let's hold up on meaning for a second. And also, I don't like how they answer the term "what does it mean?" just as a proof again that everyone gets different meaning. I was like, I'm not playing that for them. I think they're completely off base. But anyway, so again, we kind of have that quick recap of everything. But I want to look at some of the scripture, and specifically, again, some of the scripture with Job's friends, because I think that kind of tells us a lot about grief and how we process grief, and when we aren't processing grief well, or when other people aren't being helpful. I think this will just be such a quick illustration where you say, yeah, I've seen that before. So picking it up, Job curses the day he was born in Job 3. As Sam mentioned, they sat down with him for a day, they grieved with him, all good, wonderful things. But then immediately in Job 3, one of his friends follows up with this, and this is in Job 4, but it's a continuation. If one ventures a word with you, will you be offended? But who can keep from speaking? See, you have instructed many. You have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have supported those who were stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Think now, who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? What we were just speaking about, right? Like, Job, you're so great and wonderful. You have 10 children. Your farm's the biggest farm in the land. Everyone loves you and looks to you, and you've done all these great things, and you've trusted in God, and that's wonderful. And then when something bad happens to you, you just need to trust God. It'll all be okay. Just trust God. Then Job responds, oh, that I might have my request and that God would grant my desire, that would please God to crush me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off. This would be my consolation. I would even exult in unrelenting pain, for I have not denied the words of the Holy One. What is my strength that I should wait? And what is my end that I should be patient? Is my strength the strength of stones, or is my flesh bronze? In truth, I have no help in me, and any resource is driven from me. I am but a man. I have listened to God. I understand what it is you're saying, but I am in so much pain that I wish God would just end it. It's poetry, and when sometimes we look at the Bible and we skip through some of those because it's just so thick and hard to understand. But when you really break it out, I don't know, to me it's absolutely beautiful. Like, I know people who have said these kind of things, not in this way, but have said these kind of things in my office before. I know many, if not all of you in this room have felt something similar to this before. And that's the power of the poetry that we're working in here. Anything that sticks out to you in there, in either of those exchanges? Okay, so this goes back and forth for quite some time. Just in case you guys do any more research on Job, there's this guy in Job, and like all these friends are arguing back and forth, and then all of a sudden there's this guy called Elihu, and Elihu doesn't make any sense at all. Elihu is a young man who seems quite full of himself and says, "You should just pray more. How dare you all speak so terribly? You're all terrible." And a lot of scholars think that someone went back and added Elihu into the scripture because they were just uncomfortable with the whole thing. So I usually tell people, don't pay attention to Elihu. He's crazy. But then
he's not a heroic character, right? The craziness of his character is part of the story, right?
Yeah, no, I think the person who wrote him meant to be heroic and say, you need to listen to God. You need to follow God's commands.
Is Elihu one of the people that God...
No, he's never mentioned anywhere else. That's why they think it's a later edition, because they're like...
Does his speech come after God's speech?
No, it comes right before. So, and it's just you need to be better, you need to do this. And everyone's like, what is this guy? And like a lot of scholars, again, like I said, not everyone, but a lot say, this was added in later because someone was very uncomfortable with how much they were talking bad about God. So, but then Job's anger turns from his friends to God. Today also, this is from Job. Today, like Job is speaking it. Today also my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his dwelling. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, but he would give heed to me. There the upright could reason with him. The upright could reason with God. And I should be acquitted forever by my judge. And the judge isn't God either. Like, what Job does when he presents his complaints about God, he wants a trial with God on the stand where he can say, I have done nothing wrong. I'm presenting all the evidence. You're punishing me unfairly. And that somebody would rule in Job's favor that says, no, you're right. God was unfair to you.
Sorry, just a comprehension type question. Can you explain why God's not the judge in this passage?
Yeah, so further on, like in more context of what Job's saying, instead of just this little thing, he talks a lot about, he wants to present his case to someone on why God has treated him unfairly. And he wishes that he had there's other places where he says he wishes he had a prosecuting attorney. Like he wishes he had an attorney that could also argue on his behalf and that he could file a complaint. Like it's all...
He would want, and he says that he would want God to be the defendant.
Pretty much.
To this case, and a third party would be the judge.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So he calls God his adversary. God is my adversary in a lot of other places. Like he goes from mad at his friends to mad at God very quickly. So, a few questions. Are humans these three, are humans allowed to be mad at God? Why or why not? What are some ways people have talked to you in the midst of grief that has been less than helpful? And does God answer our complaints? And if so, how? And since there's not a ton of us tonight, I'll invite you to reflect on any of those three. And if there's one of those three that reaches out, let's go ahead and share.
Kind of as a generalization of all three is some of the things that people have said to me in times of sadness and grief that I've had have been, I just kind of make a mental note not to ever say that to anybody else, and one of them is God's will. never worked for me.
Yeah.
There's a plan. That one doesn't feel helpful.
Do you think humans are allowed to be mad at God?
Why and why not, or why not?
I'm sorry, I'm not answering the question. Has anybody seen the movie The Apostle? Do you know that movie? Okay, never mind. Oh.
Is it scary?
No, well, this one isn't. This is like, no, I can tell you really. Who's the guy who plays Blue Bradley?
Robert Duvall.
Yeah, Robert Duvall is like this kind of charismatic pastor, and he finds his wife in bed with another man, and like out of just the heat of passion kills him, and then runs away and starts like a little country church somewhere, and he like is pastor and like is doing all these like good works in the church, but on the lam, and at the end he like does get arrested. But the question kind of is like, is he good or is he bad, right? It's like, it's
And
both.
one thing, there's a part of the movie where you see Robert Duvall and you like watch him pray, and he's like looking up at the ceiling. And he's like, "I love you, Lord, but I'm mad at you," and that just sticks in my head. That's all I have. No insight there.
Well, I mean, I first thought that came to me about, are humans allowed to be mad at God? And I would say yes, but not forever. And I say that because I feel that way about like my parents, for example, like, or family. Like, yes, you're allowed to be mad at them, but not forever. Like, there has to be some reconciliation, some understanding, some. And for God, you know, maybe that happens faster than other times because you're trying to process it. But I don't know. That was like just a thought that came to mind.
I like that. Any other thoughts?
By the very nature of having free will, if you believe in that, of course we're allowed to be mad at him. Like, that's not free will to
Yeah.
be mad at him, right?
And we're human.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're
I
not
think we're allowed to
mad.
be mad. God gets mad, and we're made in God's image. So we can do all the things God can do and feel all the things God can feel. And God gets mad at us.
Just with my medical issues that I've been going through, the ways that people talk to you in the midst of grief that have been less than helpful. This doesn't apply to anybody who goes to this church, but I have quite a few friends who don't believe in God, who are not Christians, who have tried very, very hard to give me comforting words, and I think without any reference to God, I appreciate them trying to help, but
It feels a little empty.
yeah, it just feels like everything a person tries to say that doesn't have something to do with God loves you and he's with you, and it just doesn't really do anything for me. I still appreciate those people, but
Yeah.
I think that's the key. Appreciate that they're trying to help you. You know, I think we need to remember that.
I do tell folks if they experience something like what we've been talking about, I do try to tell them like, hey, they're at least trying to be helpful. It's okay if you don't feel like that right now, because I know it's hard to when someone kind of cuts you with a little paper cut that you would be just okay with what they're doing, but they are trying to help. Like, so.
I mean, I think the other thing is if a person is really trying to help you, and you let them know like, hey, don't tell me that right now. I don't need to hear it. Like they'll be receptive.
Yeah, good point. So I want to move a second away from Job and talk more generally about grief. Up on the screen, I've got several different definitions in different ways of what grief is. I don't know if everyone can see it. I hope you can. If you can't, feel free to move closer. But I'm curious from your guys' perspective, which one of these, or any, I always ask, what resonates with you? Where is your soul vibrating when you read those, or if any? Or if there's any sort of through line thread.
grief means you've been brave with your heart.
Grief means you've been brave with your heart.
That's a positive way of thinking of it and accepting it, and it's a compliment to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And these others resonate?
Like that, the last quote hit me a little harder just because after you do experience a big time issue, you, at least in my experience, I saw some of the assumptions I had about my life and things that I depended on that weren't exactly as foundational as God. You know, when everything is really bad, you're kind of forced to depend on God in a way that I wish I could depend on God in that way even when things were good, but I kind of had to be forced into it by that situation.
Yeah.
I think that's true of all of us though, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I think the human condition, and we're set to survive, which means we're set to look at the negative, because that's how you survive. We're set to control as many variables as possible, because that's how we survive, that's how we evolved as beings. And so this notion of grief, I think, as we evolve, is much about learning how to let go. And there's grief in that, right? There's grief in letting go of the ideas of who you are, the expectations of what it was, that even the fact that your own thoughts determine your happiness, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a letting go in that, and that's what I see in that. And there's a letting go so that you can rely on somebody explain control to me. Like, Julia, you can only control things that are your actions and your behaviors, and everything else is about trust. And if you believe in God, gosh, it's so reassuring to know that that trust is sitting in a divine being that is based on love. So to me, that's very reassuring, but it is really hard because it goes against the very nature of how humans were evolved as beings.
Yeah. So I put all these up here as kind of as a beginning illustration that if you've ever experienced grief, and maybe it's because I just didn't want to put the most nerdiest quote up here I could, which is, if you've ever seen the show on Disney Plus, WandaVision, and they're talking about Vision, the character says, grief is nothing but love everlasting. When you experience grief, it's because you're human. You've had a connection. You've had experience. There's what Walter Brueggemann says, it's an index of our humanity. When we feel grief, it's a proof that we're human, that we've built relationships and trust and been with people. And then when something changes, when something ends, when something is over, and we grieve it, it's because we're human. Like, there's nothing wrong with grief. And I present this, and I want to give proper credit. Sometimes I don't do that in this class, but I will on this one. Ashley Chang, our Minister of Congregational Care, actually sent this to me, and I really liked it, so I put it in. About what grief is not. You know, it's not a straight line. Grief ebbs and flows, and you might think, I'm okay this one day, but then all of a sudden I'm not. Like, it can go back and forth. It's not just one thing. Grief is not something to get over. Grief is not healed by time alone, and grief is not erased by platitudes. Each person, grief is as unique as their fingerprint. Anything in there that resonates with you?
That grief is not healed by time alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like there's a lot of times you feel like, I should be over this by now. And like, you're just not, but you always hear like, well, you know.
Get over it.
Get over it. Like, time's passed. Like, that's it. You know, that happened like 10 years ago, 20 years, whatever. And you're just like, it's still, you know, it can hurt. And I feel like validating that is important.
And these others resonate?
That it's not erased by platitudes.
Also go over some common grief myths, again from Ashley. So this idea that grief ends. Grief evolves. You know, we might, I like in thinking about the poem where you learn to breathe underwater. Like that's what this is all about. The water doesn't necessarily subside, you just learn how to breathe underwater. We move on. Actually, we move forward with the memories and love. Time heals all wounds. And actually, it's intention and compassion that nurtures healing. I don't understand the time heals all wounds, where that even comes from, because I've never seen that to be true. But what is true, again, as Ashley puts here, is that intention and compassion nurtures healing. If we let ourselves feel the grief, if we understand where it comes from, if we process it, if we go to therapy, and work on that intentionally, that's where we can find healing. And persons who are grieving want to be cheered up. They need to be heard and grief witnessed. Okay, so I want to kind of wrap a little bow here on Job. And I really struggled with how to do this because in a 5-point presentation, I could go through what to me is the most meaningful thing about Job. But honestly, it's so much deeper. And sometimes I present it and I think, is this really what Job's about? Like this feels kind of hollow. And so when I say, excuse me while I riff a bit, I'm not going to put what I'm thinking up there because I just kind of want to, I've prepped it, but I just kind of want to let it come out and see where we end up. So in the book of Job, Job is complaining to God and says, I wish I could have an audience with the Almighty. I wish God would come down here. I'd tell him how wrong he is. I'm so mad, so upset. I want to face my accuser. And then in the book of Job, that's exactly what happens. God comes down and answers Job. And in our video, it talks about giving him a virtual tour of the entire world. And that's kind of what happens. But really what happens is God asks him, were you there when the earth was formed? Were you there when where the sea stopped? Were you there? Did you teach the rooster when to crow? Did you teach the lion how to roar? Did you do all of these things that are part of creation? And Job tries to answer God, but it doesn't work. God keeps going, Do you provide for each of these animals? Do you provide for the birds of the air? Do you create all that's in front of you? Do you understand how the world works? And he even compares, they talked about the two beasts. He compares these two beasts and say, I created these beasts, so may it be. And a lot of people say, well, they're not actual beasts, it's metaphorical beasts, whatever. But he's like, I've created, my creation I see as good. If you have a sea dragon that it destroys a pirate ship, so to say, it's still my creation. I still care for that sea dragon. Like, again, it gets weird at times, but at the same time, the overall message is, how could you even begin to understand how the world works? Gives them this listing of every single thing where God was at the beginning of creation. Who do you think you are, Job? And Job answers, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I do not understand, things too wonderful for me that I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you declare to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Now let's be very clear. This last part, these these last little stanza here. I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear, and now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. I would not be honest with you if I did not say the Hebrew language here is very unclear. It could mean lots of different things. But when I read that, what I hear is that Job is admitting that he doesn't understand how the world works. And therefore he says, despise, maybe, or discouraged, could be that word. But therefore I give up, you're right, and I will sit in dust and ashes in signs of repentance and just be. And what gets me about this story more than anything else is something that is not in these words. You cannot find it explained. The narrator doesn't say anything. Is that through all this, Job is asking, man, I want to just tell God off. Tell God what's going on. I want to be so mad and prove how wrong God is, how he's not. He does. I just want to be there. Do you think the God of the universe actually has to spend time and answer Job? If God is so powerful, God does not need to answer Job. But God still answers Job. He still spends time with Job. He sits in dust and ashes with Job. And that, to me, is the message of the book of Job. That a God who created the universe, did all these glorious things, has done more than any of us could possibly imagine. The creator of the universe cares enough to spend time when we're grieving, mad, hurt, instead of like zapping us on the earth for how dare you say those bad things about me. God is with Job. God doesn't. The only scolding God does to Job is, where were you at? Where were you to say these things? But God's still with Job in the midst of his grief. And that, to me, is the power of this story.
I do think like a more satisfying version of God coming down to be with us in our suffering is Jesus.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But it's consistent. Like that's where, like God came down to be with us in our grief because of Jesus. Like so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that seems like better. Like that was more like suffering with us and not so much just like calling us ants.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Any thoughts? Am I totally wrong? You can tell me I'm totally wrong. I heard of like 4 theologians with doctorate degrees today tell me that I'm wrong. So.
I kind of want to hear the end of the video.
You do? I will play it. I will. It's not very dissimilar.
Begins with a strange story that takes place up in the heavens, which are described as. From Job's point of view, it looks like God is not just. But God's perspective is infinitely bigger. He's dynamically interacting with a whole universe of complexity when he makes decisions. And this is what God calls his wisdom.
So Job asking God to defend himself is actually kind of absurd.
He couldn't comprehend this kind of complexity even if he wanted to.
So where does this leave us?
Well, it leaves Job in a place of humility. He never learned why he suffered, and yet he's able to live in peace and in the fear of the Lord.
But that's not where the book ends, because after this, God restores to Job double everything he had lost. And this, again, is surprising. I mean, is this a reward? Is God saying, congratulations, Job, you passed this elaborate test?
No, I mean, the whole book just made the point that Job losing everything was not a punishment, and so now getting it back isn't a reward.
So why does he get it back?
Well, apparently, God, in his wisdom, decided to give Job a gift. We don't know why. But what we do know is that Job is now the kind of person who, no matter what comes, good or bad, he can trust God's wisdom.
And that's the book of Job and the end of our wisdom series.
Yeah, so.
You didn't talk about the good part at the end very much.
I didn't talk about the good part of the end very much. I know that, yeah. So, and because I struggle with the end because it presents, and so do a lot of scholars. You struggle with the end because it's like, oh, God gives Job 7 more children, and it's like, well, I kind of like the 10 children that died first back. Like I have my own personal issues at the end of the book, but
Did his friends tell him he must have done good, so he got double the stuff?
no, God actually tells his friends off and says, "How dare you speak so poorly to Job?" Like, and
Says you should hope that Job prays for you, so.
I don't punish you. Yeah, like again, I like the poetry part a lot better. It's much more interesting than the prose to me. But that's my own bias.
Feeling very like fairy tale-ish.
Yeah.
Like, when you kind of put on the and everything worked out.
Right.
Like,
Maybe it's supposed to be telling you that after periods of suffering won't necessarily last forever.
That's very true. I could see that.
I think the way I looked at it, the beginning of the book is God and his dealings with Satan, and the middle of the book is God proves to Satan that some people are good because they're good and not because they're rewarded. So at the end of the book, he doesn't need to, it's actually not God that takes away his children and his health. It's Satan that does that. God gives him permission to, and Satan is proven wrong, and you don't read this in the text, but at least the way I've seen that is since the altercation with Satan is over, then he can be restored to having children and having his health back and having his wife back because that whole altercation is over. I know that's reading into the story, not reading out of it, but at least that's.
But that's the thing about this story and this book is that you can pull those meanings out. I'm pulling meaning out of it without it being written there. It does not say, and Job realized that God was with him even despite that's what this is for. That's the great part of this wisdom literature, what we've been talking about in Proverbs, Job, and what we'll talk about in Ecclesiastes. Like wisdom is all about context and what we pull out and understanding that there is not one answer when it comes to wisdom or what to do when life's unfair.
I also think you could interpret it as when bad things happen to you, it's because God is letting Satan do them to you.
Which is also why I don't like the prose. And do keep in mind, when we say it's the one important thing about the character of Satan or Satan is that it's not like the Satan we think of in Christian circles. It's like the accuser who's saying, the way you're running the world isn't right. It's still bad, but not like the manifestation of evil or anything like that.
Yeah, the thing about God is letting Satan inflict harm on you. If you lay all the options of how God can allow you to suffer, it's okay, God is not causing your pain and suffering. It's a demonic force, and God is allowing it because he has a morally sufficient reason that you don't know about. Another option is God is limited in his power to help you, and something natural in the world happened to you, and God is it's just too hard for God. Yeah, that's also. Don't eat that, buddy. It's like another thing is your suffering is meaningless, and somehow God allows it, or God is causing your suffering. I guess my point is that's a problematic viewpoint, but. You need to come up with an alternative viewpoint that's less problematic than God is allowing
And again,
Satan to cause harm for you, and he has a reason that you don't know about it.
And everything you just said and everything we've talked about tonight is again why I love this book so much. The meanings are so all over the place. It's not like a lot of other places where you see do this, don't do this. That's not a lot of the Bible anyway. But the wisdom of finding different perspectives and understanding. Want to end tonight, since we've got babies who are just wandering the room. Don't want to get them too
I have
late.
one really fast question. You can say yes or no.
Okay, go for it.
Do you think it's all foreshadowing Jesus being tempted?
Oh, there are folks who believe that is the case. So there are folks. I'm very careful when I make connections between Jesus and the Old Testament, which in Joy class we're talking about right now, like with our study. But it is very interesting that you'd pick up on that, and others have as well. So.
There's also the New Testament authors knew all the Old Testament stories, so they draw connections.
Yeah.
We can draw.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We're going to go on our modern take, and if we turn into Baby Fight Club up here, I will separate them. But let's meet our good place from examples from there. Let's meet Janet.
Maybe it's a test. Maybe if you go to Michael and you tell him the truth, you'll pass the test and you'll get to stay.
No way. I can't risk going to the bad place.
Okay, well, maybe it's not actually like all that bad. Let's just get some information first. We'll ask Janet. Hey, Janet?
Hi there. How can I help you?
What the fork? Who are you?
I'm Janet. I'm the informational assistant here in the Good Place.
She's like this walking database. You can ask her about the creation of the universe or history.
Oh, there was a guy who lived in Avondale, Arizona around 2002. His name was Kevin Peltonic. Is he gay?
No.
Really? Huh. I guess he just didn't want to have sex with me.
That's correct.
Well, that's fine. I wasn't that into him anyway.
Yes, you were.
Okay, Janet, I have a question.
Okay.
What is the bad place like?
Oh, sorry. That is the one topic I'm not allowed to tell you about. I can only play you a brief audio clip of what is happening there right now.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't sound awesome.
So Janet is a character in The Good Place who is kind of the all-knowing, I would sometimes argue, and perhaps other sitcom enthusiasts would argue against this, but I see it kind of as like a God figure. Understanding, has all the knowledge of the universe, knows everything that's going to happen, can explain everything, and is the guide, but the idea is she has all knowledge. And that's the important thing to know for this clip that I think illustrates the book of Job very well.
Janet?
Hi there.
Hi, Janet. Can you just, tell me the answer?
Sorry?
The answer to everything. You know all there is to know in the universe. Crunch the numbers. Tell me the answer. What's the point of love if it's just going to disappear? And how is it worse to not love anybody? There has to be meaning to existence. Otherwise, the universe is just made of pain, and I don't like the thought of that. So tell me the answer.
I know how you feel. Back on Earth, I had to watch Jason have no recognition of me. It felt like right before someone pushes a plunger and murders you. Sure. The more human I become, the less things make sense. But that's part of the fun, right?
What do you mean?
If there were an answer I could give you to how the universe works, it wouldn't be special. It would just be machinery fulfilling its cosmic design. It would just be a big, dumb food processor. But since nothing seems to make sense, when you find something or someone that does, it's euphoria. In all this randomness, in this pandemonium, you and Chidi found each other and you had a life together. Isn't that remarkable?
Pandemonium is from Paradise Lost. Milton called the center of hell Pandemonium, meaning place of all demons. Chidi tricked me into reading Paradise Lost by telling me Satan was, and I quote, my type. A big, mean, bald guy with a goatee. I mean, he wasn't wrong.
Oh no, that's very on brand for you.
I guess all I can do is embrace the pandemonium. Find happiness in the unique insanity of being here. Now.
We'll do this together. In the words of the man that I love, I got you, dog.
Thanks, Janet. For a robot, you make a really good girlfriend.
I'm 1 out of 3 of those things. But thank you.
Hopefully you can see the connections. I think it's an easier way that's not so poetic to bring those ideas. So, back to our poem that we began with. There is no good answer for why bad things happen. The book of Job in the good place would suggest that even in the bad, God is with us. I like this quote, and my gosh, Jürgen Moltmann, he is a wonderful theologian who talks all about God who suffers alongside with us. I love this quote, God weeps with us so that we may one day laugh with him. Other things he says is that God suffers alongside of us, so God understands our suffering, is with us, is through it. And that's proven in the cross, in the story of Jesus. Or otherwise, God meets us in the ash heap when we're down in our lowest point, when we don't have anywhere to turn, when we don't know what to happen. Our friends have left us, our health has left us, we have no more hope, no more reason to survive. Throughout all of that, God is with us. And, like in Romans 8, the idea that there is nowhere we can go, no heights, nor depths, nor anything created that can separate us from the love of God, ever. So even when we're angry, and all we want to do is throw the damn lemons, God is still with us. And that's it. I think so.